Wokingham Today is hosting a series of interviews with leaders of local political parties in the run-up to the 2024 local elections. Each leader is going to be answering questions on 5 topics, and at the end they'll be invited to make a direct address to you, the voter. While the leaders have been given advance warning of the topics that we will cover, they have not been given the questions in advance. Wokingham Today has also created ward pages on its website, giving you the chance to meet the candidates standing in each ward. For this interview, I'm joined by Pauline Jorgensen, the leader of Wokingham Conservatives. Thank you for joining us for this interview.
Thanks, Phil.
The first topic that we're looking at is the subject of council budgets, council finances. And in April this year, council tax rose again by the maximum amount in Wokingham. This is partly because Wokingham is one of the lowest funded unitary authorities in the country, a situation that hasn't changed from when the Conservatives were running the council. Are you comfortable with council tax having to rise by the maximum? Are you comfortable with the fact that central government wants councils to do this?
Well, I think central government's trying to protect the electorate from councils increasing council tax by too much, which is why the council tax increases are capped at the level that they are. I think, obviously, the council's always been low funded from the government. That's no secret. The council tax budget process and formula was first formulated by Gordon Brown and Labour, and it really hasn't changed that much. I would like to see that reviewed because I think I would like to see it take more account of the cost of providing services in different places. At the moment, it's very biased in favour of inner cities and also people in the depths of the countryside. So I'd like to see a reform of the formula to make sure that it covers the cost of providing services. As far as the government grant this year is concerned, the council's core spending power when we lost control of the council was 151 million. This year it's 174.8 million. And this year it increased by 7% with council tax, with inflation at currently 3.4%. And our core spending power is actually more than any other council in Berkshire. That's the amount we've got to spend per resident. So the council itself is relatively well funded when you take council tax and also government grant into account. And indeed, the government gave the council an extra 1.6 million after the funding announcement to try and help core funding. And we would campaign for more funding. We'd campaign for a change in the formula. So I think that probably summarises my position.
Part of the increase,
Sorry, Phil, I didn't.
Of the increase in core spending power is to negate the rise of inflation, and the two things don't quite match. So surely there's a disconnect there.
Yeah, I think inflation is dropping. Inflation is currently at 3.4%. Core spending power, as I say, increased by 7%. Some of that is due to the cost of adult social care. So it's increased demand for services as well. And there is greater demand for council services in previous years, and both us and the Liberals and Labour would accept that.
Now, in your election literature, you talk about your financial plans in that you'd be looking to see what you can root out, what wasted money that you can root out from council spending. What have you got in mind with that?
Well, there's a few things that we think they could save money on. For a start, there's a very high level of spend for consultants. We have been pushing very hard at Personnel Board and at Scrutiny about the cost of consultants and the amount of consultants that are being employed. The number is slowly coming down, but we'd like to see that coming down faster. In addition, they've got some very extravagant projects in the budget. For instance, spending £5 million moving the headquarters of the council from Shoot End to Marks and Spencer's building, which isn't even suitable as a headquarters for the council because there isn't a big enough space to have council meetings, and there also isn't enough parking for residents. And we think it's important that anywhere that the council meets has a proper place for council meetings to take place, and also has enough space that residents can park and can come and listen to democracy. It's absolutely crucial that when there's a contentious planning application or a contentious meeting, that the residents can actually come and see firsthand, what people are saying and where their politicians are actually going. So that's 5 million wasted to begin with. They're spending £2 million on the new waste programme, including quite a lot of consultants on that as well. Again, we don't think that the waste programme is properly thought out. We actually believe it will reduce the amount of recycling because by going to bi-weekly waste in the week where you're not getting your bins, I mean, the bin lorry will come around and collect every week, but it won't take everything. in the week where you're not getting your recycling collected, it's likely that some people will put it in the wheelie bin. So actually, we think it might damage recycling levels rather than increase them. And we don't think it's certainly worth spending £2 million. So that's a couple of examples. There are plenty more. California Crossroads would be another example.
We'll come back to some of the recycling thing later. But the next thing I wanted to ask you was, it's just there's problems auditing accounts. Local authorities across the country are struggling with this. And Wokingham made headlines across the world last month when they pointed out that EY had said it couldn't complete the audit of Wokingham's accounts. What do you think should be done?
What about auditing the accounts? I think it's really important to audit the accounts. I mean, the first thing I would like to understand is what the contract with EY actually says. Now, I know the contract is with the government, but I'm brought up in an old-fashioned position where if you've got a contract to do a job, you have to do it. So I'd like to understand exactly what the contract says. I think it's really important that councils are audited properly and promptly, unlike Reading that got fined for it reasonably recently, I think. So yeah, it's very important. We need to have good audit. Whoever sets and selects the auditor, and I believe it might be government, needs to get their act together and make sure that we've got auditors that can actually complete the job.
Moving on to the increased demand in services, this is something that local authorities have been facing over the past few years. There's more demand for adult social care, there's more demand for children's services. Now, in the literature, you acknowledge that schools, health, and social care are some of the biggest areas of spending for this council. What do you think Conservatives would do differently if they were running Wokingham Borough Council?
Well, we had a record when we were in charge of being innovative in terms of our approach to these problems. We set up Optilis, if you remember, and that returned nearly more than £500,000 to the council in income in 2020-21, despite the impact of the pandemic, and it was on track to deliver £400,000 savings by the time we left office. Those sort of things where you provide a really good service and 67% of people using the services were happy with the service, which was much better than the average. We still managed to provide it at a good quality and a good cost. Those sort of innovative things are the way we would try and reduce the cost of adult social care.
You also talk about how a Conservative-run administration would provide more council-supported care home beds. And again, this is a massive cost. It's a massive burden on the council's finances. So how do you think that could be funded?
I'm not sure it needs to be funded as such. I think what we need to do is give people a choice of council funded. A lot of care homes are very, very expensive, and we need to make sure that the care homes that we can use are a reasonable cost, because obviously the council has to pay the cost of care for people who can't afford it themselves. So it's a way of actually reducing the cost for the council. We have to pay for it anyway. If you can't afford the care yourself and you go into a private home, the council has to pay the costs of that home. So it's a way of reducing costs, not of increasing it.
So you're broadly in favour then of the current administration's proposal to buy the care home. I've forgotten where it is now, but you're in favour of them buying that care home. But I guess you would have liked to have seen them carry on the proposal to build the other one that they've proposed near Cantley.
That's right. I would do it. I mean, I'm not against them buying care homes. I'm certainly in favour of them building the one they were going to build. I haven't seen the detail of the purchase of the one that they're going to purchase, so I can't say I'm in favour of that particular deal. But in principle, I'm in favour of what they're doing.
Also, you must be in favour then of seeing the increase in SEND schools being built, or SEND provision, because obviously, you know, the cost of transporting children to specialist schools outside the borough is massive. So to be able to have schools on the doorstep is going to be a real benefit.
Yeah, the government are giving us £20 million to build 2 new SEND schools. I mean, there is a bit of a problem with where they're planning to put them, or where the council are planning to put them, in the transport and the roads are really not up to that level of development. But in principle, we're very, very happy that the Department of Education have provided new schools and new money, and they've also given us some money to increase the SEND school in Woodley as well, which is excellent. So I'm really in favour of that, and it's really good news.
So actually one of the problems that we've got, because they're only a finite amount of land. One of the SEND schools that's being built, the one in Winnersh, there was concerns that it's too close to the motorway, for example. obviously it's now in process, it's being built. So, yeah, unless we're building on Rook's Nest, unless we're building another place, where else could these schools grow?
I think we'd have to have a look at the full extent of the land available to the borough. There is land all over the place that's available. There's land which will be zoned for housing. We need to have a good strategic look with the planners about where we would put them. But at the moment, I think the site is set. It's already been agreed. I just have concerns about how they're going to access it.
Well, moving on now to one of your key election issues, which is changes to waste collections and litter bins. Now, later this summer, Wokingham is going to start the process of switching over to wheelie bins and having fortnightly collections for recycling and general waste, while food waste will carry on being collected weekly.
Yeah.
85% of councils across the country follow this pattern, either fortnightly or through weekly. So why do you want to stick to weekly? Why have you made that an election pledge?
Because fundamentally, a lot of the houses in Wokingham Borough are not designed to store 2 weeks' worth of recycling waste. A lot of people are coming to us and saying, we just don't know where we're going to put it. We don't think the scheme itself will save money, because we believe that if logic says, I think, if you're only going to get your recycling and your paper and your cans collected every 2 weeks, you're going to have to find somewhere to put it in the other week. If you're going to put it somewhere in the other week and you haven't got anywhere to store it, the likelihood is you're going to put it in your wheelie bin and leave it out. The council did actually do a consultation before they decided to go in this direction, and less than 25% of people were in favour of changing to bi-weekly waste. If you look at the councils that do already have bi-weekly waste, yeah, you're right. A lot of the very good recycling councils have bi-weekly waste, but some of the councils with the worst record of recycling have also got bi-weekly waste. I'm not convinced there's a correlation between wheelie bins, bi-weekly waste and recycling performance in terms of that it's obviously going to increase it. I don't think it will. Also, just to bear in mind that the actual service, the administration have admitted that if you collect wheelie bins, it actually takes longer and costs more. So if you're going to collect them, there's actually a cost in terms of the amount of time and the amount of bin lorries that are actually needed to collect it. So I do think it's a ill thought out scheme. We still haven't seen a detailed business case. It's very noticeable that they're implementing it in June after the elections rather than earlier in the year, when people could actually see what the impact was on them.
Well, the scheme will be implemented at any point. However, I just want to pick up when the Conservatives were running the council, you did actually explore the idea of fortnightly collections, and we ran a story in the paper that you'd been ringing around residents to canvass views. So isn't it actually hypocritical of you to be saying we've got to keep weekly collections when actually you were exploring this option in the first place?
No, it's not, because actually we looked at it, we assessed it, we asked residents what they thought, and we decided not to do it. So that's perfectly reasonable. Unlike the Liberals, who asked the residents what they wanted, they didn't want it and they did it anyway.
And the idea behind switching to fortnightly collections, as well as trying to increase recycling rates, it's partly about saving money. It's partly about meeting future government waste collection requirements. So shouldn't this actually be welcomed as a scheme, as a concept, regardless of what you think about whether the collection should be weekly or fortnightly? The idea that we're trying to encourage residents to recycle more is something that should be welcomed with open arms.
Yeah, I agree. We should encourage people to recycle more, and we were making very good inroads in recycling rates before we lost control of the council. We were the ones that introduced food waste recycling, first of this area in the RE3 to introduce food waste recycling, and the recycling rates are increasing. I think the way to recycle more is to actually increase choice, increase variety, and make it easier for people to recycle, not enforce fixed size bins that are inflexible, and also a bi-weekly collection. That's not the way to improve things. The way to improve things is to give people choice and to encourage people by giving them more opportunity. And that's what we did when we increased food recycling.
Right. Last summer, the council covered over litter bins and then admitted and apologised for its mistake. It's reviewing the provision of public bins. You say there's going to be no reduction if the Conservatives ran the council again. So just talk me through that. Why do you think that that is a sensible policy, and how do you think that can be afforded?
So what we've said is we will not reduce the number of litter bins. If there's 6 litter bins in one place, we may well move some to make it better in terms of coverage. There are some areas that haven't got litter bins at all. I would actually like to see a better spread of litter bins so that people have options in terms of putting litter in places rather than throwing it on the ground. If people don't have places to put litter, what happens is they dump it on the ground and then you end up spending more cleaning up afterwards. And I also think it's quite important to help parents educate children. That means that they've got a litter bin by the play equipment or whatever so they can put the litter in. When we looked at the proposals to remove litter bins that the Liberals produced and then implemented without telling anybody, they were taking a lot of litter bins away from school play areas. And they were taking some away, not because they were not used, but because they were difficult to empty. That's not a good reason for removing litter bins. I'd like to see a review of the contract to see what exactly it says and see if we can get more litter bin emptying out of the contract. But I don't think scrapping litter bins is a very sensible way to go. The place was a mess. I certainly was on Loddon Bridge Road where one of them was covered up and there were piles of dog poo on the ground. You could smell it from people's front doorsteps. It was disgusting. And that is not acceptable for the dog walkers. But on the other hand, I think we need to provide facilities. That's what we're here for. Provide facilities that help people do the right thing. And I think that comes back to the fundamental difference between us and the Liberals. We want to provide facilities and provide help for people to do the right thing, which actually helps them and also reduces the cost for the council. And the Liberals just want to punish people, which they do by removing litter bins, by introducing bi-weekly waste, by all sorts of things that they try and do.
When it first happened last year, when the first bins were covered over, what was your initial reaction to that?
Actually, complete astonishment. The first thing I did was actually try and find out what on earth was going on, which was quite difficult. And then we found out from residents there was no consultation, there was no decision in council, there was nothing. What we heard was residents were saying, what on earth's going on? There's covers going over our litter bins. We tried to find out what was going on. Then Ian Shenton, who is the exec member, issued a press release saying he was reducing litter bins and removing litter bins. So we decided to call in the decision because we didn't think it had been made properly, and indeed it hadn't. One of the requirements of council decisions is if they're material and affect a lot of people, they have to be made properly and formally and with consultation, none of which happened. They tried to sneak it in through the back door. So we called it in and pointed out to the council and to the administration what impact they were having. And they claimed that they hadn't made a decision, which obviously they had because they'd issued a press release saying that they'd made a decision. So we took it to scrutiny. We compiled our evidence. We had a petition. We did all sorts of things to try and get the public mobilised behind the fact that actually removing litter bins is not sensible. And we got them to do a U-turn, which I was really pleased about.
If you were running the council, would you have acted in the same way?
Certainly not. Definitely not.
Now, one of the other big things that you're campaigning on in this election is you're saying you want to reverse the increases to car parking charges. Now, one of the reasons that the Liberal Democrat administration has said that they have increased the car parking charges is because they need to increase the income that comes in to the council, and car parking charges haven't risen for 5 years or so. So if you decide to reverse that, that's going to leave a hole in council finances, it's going to leave a hole in the budget, and it's also going to require new signage, which is also going to cost. So how sensible is this policy?
I think it's very sensible. Just to run you back to the reason that car parking charges hadn't increased, we were very conscious during COVID that a lot of businesses in the towns were hanging on by a thread, and that the last thing we wanted to do was push them over the edge by increasing car parking charges in Wokingham or in Woodley. That's not the right thing to do. When after COVID, when the economy was still recovering and businesses were still recovering again, we didn't want to increase charges and push businesses over the edge. You've got to remember that a lot of the businesses, especially in Wokingham, the sites are actually owned by the council. So the last thing you want is to encourage empty shops or indeed to put more stress on people who are finding the cost of living an issue. So we made a conscious decision not to increase car parking charges. In fact, I made the decision. And following on, the Liberals have massively, I mean, they've doubled it. They're about to consult on more increases, and they're about to consult on roadside parking meters as well. So what we're saying is we would roll back the increases. We've heard from a lot of businesses, and we heard in scrutiny at great detail, that they're really suffering because of the reduction in footfall. I've talked to people who run small newsagents. Nobody wants to spend £1 to park to go and buy a paper. And you yourself sell papers, so you must know that. So it really damages small businesses. We talked to one shopkeeper in Wokingham who said that he had 2 shops, one in Bracknell, one in Wokingham. With the increase in car parking charges, the Bracknell one was relatively level in business, and the business in the Wokingham one had gone down considerably. So we want to be sensible. We will certainly roll back these massive increases, and we've said that we won't increase car parking charges by more than inflation, which I think is reasonable.
From your capacity of the ward council, you have experience of parking meters and that with Pepper Lane. One side of Pepper Lane was Reading land and the other half was Wokingham land. And you ran a campaign to try and get parking parity on there. Why was that?
So the issue with Pepper Lane was Reading Borough had put parking meters in the bit that belongs to them with quite high charges. So they were charging similar to what you'd pay in the town centre. So as a result, people were not parking there. They were parking all over Hartsbourne and the local estates around there. And they were blocking people's drives. And I had old ladies that couldn't get their cars out of their drives and that sort of stuff because the car parking charges were too high. So I actually ran a petition then to try and get Reading Borough to reduce the car parking charges to a more reasonable level. And they actually did that in the end, which I think was good. And people do now use that parking. I think you've got to be realistic. Parking charges shouldn't be a cash cow to subsidise other council services. We've got to be realistic about what people are willing to pay. And if car parking gets too expensive, people just vote with their feet and they go and park in bus lay-bys and residential roads in places where there are not car parking charges and not parking meters. So, yeah, that's why I did it.
Okay. So, we've talked a little bit about how Wokingham Lib Dems have explored the concept of parking meters in Wokingham. Is that something you think that Wokingham Conservatives could get behind? Would you want to see them be brought in onto various streets?
I would have to understand what the benefit for the residents are. I think the council is there to provide a benefit for residents. There are circumstances, like in London, where there are parking meters which mean that local residents are protected from long-term parking outside their houses for things like train stations and that sort of stuff. So there are advantages to some of them in some places. But generally, I would want to see what's in it for the residents. We should be in there not to try and create money or income from parking and from drivers, but to try and help the residents. So I'd have to look at individual cases.
So another thing that you talk about in your election, Mr. Chair, is wanting to reduce congestion and improve traffic flows, providing alternative travel options for Wokingham. What does that mean in reality?
So we had an anti-congestion programme running before the Liberals took over the council, which they scrapped. And what we were doing was providing better signage. We were providing interactive signs that told people when there was an issue. We put a lot of monitoring on key junctions and on key traffic lights. So the council from the offices could tell where a problem was. For instance, if there was a lorry parked in the middle of a high street or something like that, and they could redirect traffic around it. So we were trying to give the council officers the ability to monitor junctions, to monitor traffic, and to actually interact with the traffic to try and divert it around any problems there are. That was the objective. We also were putting in smart lights so that they would be sensitive to the queues. And if the queues built up, they would change the phasing of the lights automatically to try and keep the traffic flowing. We're very keen to make sure that traffic flows properly. That's the main things.
One of the big bugbears, it's nationally, is potholes.
Yeah.
You made a thing about how the road maintenance budget has gone down under the Liberal Democrats. Liberal Democrats say it's gone up. So what do you think the truth is? Where does the land lie there? And what would you be doing differently if you were running Wokingham Council?
So the 3 years I ran highways when we were in control, I more or less tripled the spend on road maintenance. I think it's important to get ahead of the curve and to try and get into preventative road maintenance and try and get some of the residential roads that that had not been maintained from the day they were built up to a decent standard. The amount of claims on Woking Borough's insurance because of pothole damage has gone up by 500%. So it is a serious issue. The government have recognised it's a serious issue and given the Borough Council £12 million over 10 years additional money for road maintenance. The road maintenance spend in the budget, as far as I can see, unless you can point me to a different figure, is flat and has been flat for the last 2 years, which with inflation running at 10%-ish last year and about 3.5% this year is obviously a real-time cut. So I can see no other money that they're putting into roads. We were actually putting extra money into road maintenance. And last year, we actually provided some ideas about how they could divert money from California Crossroads into more road maintenance. So I'm very keen to make sure that we maintain our roads properly and that we provide the service that residents expect.
And the final topic I just want to touch on briefly now is the future of town centres. It's clear that retail is currently at a crossroads, and you've made much of this with the car parking charges and stuff. What would you actually like to see happen to help support Wokingham's retail centres? And by that, I don't just mean Wokingham Town Centre. I'm thinking also of the village centres of Walgrave, Twyford, and the towns of Earley, Woodley, and also Finchampstead as well. So what do you see happening to support retailers?
So I think we need to listen to the residents about individual areas. I mean, we delivered a very successful regeneration for Wokingham Town. I think it was a great success. It's a lovely area compared to what was there before, which was derelict tower blocks and scruffy bits of ground. I think we did a great job on that. The Liberals at the time were opposing that and had no to Elmsfield posters all over the place and were basically suggesting that it would be much better to have a dark store in the town centre. I think we were proved right. We've done something in Wokingham Town that retains the local character, supports local business, and if we roll back car parking charges, I'm sure that will help local businesses further. So I like to see a mixed economy in the town centres. I mean, my model of where I'd like Wokingham to be is something like Henley as well. You know, I don't want to see it turn into a Bracknell. I want to see it turn into, or see it retained as a local place that people would go to shop, which is nice and pleasant and attractive. The town centres, I think it depends on what local residents want. I mean, Earley really hasn't got a town centre because that's in Reading, unfortunately. There are some shops and there's obviously the large Asda complex, but generally Earley hasn't got a town centre. I think you could probably do something to improve the Asda area and make it a bit better. But generally, there's not much you can do around there. In Woodley, the council do not own the town centre. So I think, again, what we need to do is encourage businesses. And if we look after businesses and encourage people to come there, I mean, Woodley is quite a thriving little centre. And I've been there a lot. I've talked to residents and shops about shoplifting. I've done something with the police to try and get some CCTV in, which is now funding's been provided for that, to try and deal with shoplifting. These are the issues that harm shopkeepers: increased parking charges, antisocial behaviour, and shoplifting. And I intend to do something about all of those as much as within my power.
I want to come back on that. You said about encouraging businesses. What do you envisage that means?
I think it's about reducing the cost for businesses in terms of the car parking, that sort of thing. It's about encouraging customers in. So that the Woodley Town Centre, for example, has a TCMI. There are things that the council can do to encourage people to use the town centre through publicity, through advertising, through running little events. They've got little shelter, all that sort of stuff. So there's things you can do to attract people in. And once they're in the town centre, they'll then use the facilities for other things. I mean, I went to, a few years ago, we had a bike fair on the green in Elmsfield. And again, that encouraged a lot of people in to see e-bikes, to see bicycles, to chat with people, to eat ice cream and that sort of stuff. But they also went and used the shops. So those sort of events, if well organised and sensibly publicised, can actually really help the local residents as well and the local companies. So I'd be interested in talking to local businesses about what their ideas are, about how we can help and how we can work together to make it a really vibrant area.
So that concludes the formal part of our interview. And now I'd like to invite you, Pauline, to make your direct address to voters. Why should voters go for the Conservatives on May the 2nd?
we're obviously keen to regain control of the council. We believe that we can do what residents want in terms of running the council, and we believe we can provide a balanced budget. We've had 20 years of running the council, in which point we didn't cut services, and we continue to run the council effectively and efficiently and provide good value for money and good services. So we will promise to maintain weekly waste. We will spend more money on road maintenance, and we will roll back car parking charges. All these things people tell us on the doorsteps, that's what they want us to do. We're very keen to listen to people and do what they want. We've seen the Liberals double car parking charges, increase car parking charges over the weekends. They've reduced the spending in real terms on road maintenance. They've reduced street cleaning. People are telling me on the doorstep last night, grass isn't being cut often enough. We don't think the services are being managed properly either. And we really want to return to good services for local residents. In addition, we will sort out the issues of not having enough land supply, which means that housing is being approved on appeal, which means that it's going in greenfield sites. And we will fix that problem as well, and make sure that housing is in the right places and provides good value for residents, and that the services and the infrastructure are there to help make the areas good to live in.